Hi everybody, welcome to Unit 9, the endocrine system. We're going to talk about the hormones and the glands that secrete them. We're going to talk about what those hormones do. We're going to talk about how different hormones act depending on whether they're made from protein or steroids. And we'll talk about negative feedback and how to regulate hormone secretions. All hormones are released from glands, and the glands that you need to know for this section include the hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal gland, which hopefully you already know from Unit 8, the thyroid gland, parathyroid gland, which is right behind the thyroid or actually attached to it, the pancreas, and the adrenal glands. The ovaries and testes are, of course, also endocrine glands, and we'll briefly mention them here and talk more about that in Unit 15. An endocrine gland, and hopefully you remember this from Unit 4 with the tissues, an endocrine gland secretes its secretion into the blood. And an exocrine gland, the secretion there, is secreted to the outside. So the difference between endocrine versus exocrine is both secretions are produced by glands, but it depends on where it's going. All hormones are endocrine because they end up in the blood. So in order to check somebody's hormone levels, you'll always take blood. Okay, a hormone, by definition, is a chemical found in the blood which changes the function of a target cell. All three of those things must be true. It's a chemical, and it's always found in the blood, and it changes the function of a target cell. Okay, remember, there's lots of different chemicals in the human body, like cytokines or neurotransmitters, enzymes, and so the definition of a hormone is specific to that particular kind of molecule. Target cells have a receptor for that hormone. Okay, so in order to be a target for a hormone, you have to have a receptor for that hormone. Some cells have receptors for lots of different hormones, and some cells only have receptors for one. Hormone receptors are proteins. They are either located on the cell surface or internally, depending on the type of hormone it binds. So there's two major types of hormones, protein-based and lipid-based. Protein hormones are made of protein or amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, and because they're proteins and water soluble, they will not go through a cell membrane. So the receptors for protein hormones are going to be located on the cell surface. Protein hormones never get inside cells. They bind receptors on the surface of cells. Lipid-based hormones are either synthesized from cholesterol or fatty acids, and because they're lipid, like the cell membrane, will diffuse through a cell membrane. So the receptors for lipid hormones are always found inside the cell. Okay, protein binds receptors on the surface, and lipid-based hormones bind receptors inside. So here's a picture of a lipid-soluble hormone. Okay, and it's in the blood. It diffuses out of the blood, diffuses into the cell. Notice it binds a receptor that's inside the cell. The receptor in this picture is the little blue square. And how it works is it turns on transcription or turns transcription on or off. Remember, transcription and translation generate a product of a gene, a protein. So it either turns on or turns off gene expression. Okay. So lipid-soluble hormone dissolves through the cell membrane and binds a receptor inside, and its change in function is to make a protein, do transcription and translation, or to block the synthesis of that protein. Whereas a protein hormone, because it's water soluble, binds receptors on the surface, and it causes the production of a second messenger inside. And you don't have to worry about all these details, but essentially it turns enzymes on and off, or it induces growth, or it can change gene expression, but usually the action of a protein hormone occurs right away. If that hormone is epinephrine and it binds the receptor for epinephrine on a heart cell, that cell will start to contract faster right away. Okay, so protein hormones usually act very quickly. And that's talked about in this slide. Okay, steroid hormones made from cholesterol, protein hormones, amino acids, or short chains of amino acids called peptides. Protein hormones are water soluble and do not pass through the cell membrane, but lipid soluble hormones do. Protein hormones bind cell surface receptors, steroid hormones bind the receptor inside the cell. And protein hormones like epinephrine and insulin generally act very fast. The result, epinephrine, your heart beats faster, you breathe faster right away. Insulin immediately drops your blood sugar. Whereas steroid hormones generally take longer to act, like testosterone. If somebody was taking androgens like testosterone for bodybuilding, their muscles aren't bigger the next day. It takes months of that to build up the muscle, the reason people take androgens. Aldosterone and cortisol also are steroid hormones, and they act over the long term rather than very quick like protein hormones. Here's an example of cortisol. You don't necessarily need to worry about the stuff on the left. Notice the adrenal gland there is stimulated by various things in the brain, the hypothalamus and pituitary hormones. And there's a picture of the hormone cortisol that comes out of the adrenal gland. See that 4-ring structure there? The base of that is cholesterol. Cortisol is a lipid-soluble hormone, so it goes through the cell membrane and it binds receptors inside the cell, and it targets gene expression to cause its effect. Cortisone, which we can buy over the counter, mimics cortisol. And one of the things that cortisol does is reduce inflammation, which is why we buy cortisone, to stop itching or inflammation. We put it on rashes, for example. So, what's a hormone? You should be able to define that now. A chemical found in the blood that changes the function of a target cell. They can be made out of proteins or a lipid base. They work at the cellular level, both of them do, but lipid-soluble bind receptors inside the cell and change gene expression and are longer lasting, or takes longer to see the change in function. And protein hormones bind cell surface receptors, cause an action to happen inside right away, usually in that cell. If you want some more information about how hormones work, this is a great YouTube link right here. So go back to your original PowerPoints and click on that if you want some more information. Alright, the next several slides are going to talk about individual hormones that you need to know about. And the bullet points are all the same here. Would highly recommend you make a set of flashcards about these hormones to learn them. The first bullet point is the abbreviation, if there is one. You can use the abbreviation or the whole word, whichever makes you more comfortable. The second bullet point tells you where that hormone is released from. So in this example, growth hormone is released from the anterior pituitary. The target is the third bullet point. Where does growth hormone go? Bones, muscles, and the gut organs. So all of these tissues, the bones, the muscles, and the gut organs, would have receptors for growth hormone. And then the last bullet point is the function. What does this hormone do? It makes you grow, hence the name growth hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, sometimes abbreviated FSH and LH, are both released from the anterior pituitary at puberty. Okay, these aren't released until puberty hits. They target the ovaries or testes, depending on whether you're a female or a male. And in women, LH induces ovulation, FSH makes you produce eggs, FSH in men makes you produce sperm, and LH causes the release of testosterone. Okay. Prolactin, there's no real abbreviation for prolactin that I know of. It also comes out of the anterior pituitary. It targets the breast tissue and causes milk to be made. Okay, milk synthesis. It does exist in men, but nobody's quite sure why, because milk synthesis doesn't occur in men. There's no target. Oxytocin comes out of the posterior pituitary. The nervous system activates the release of this one. It targets the uterus and the breast, and so originally it was thought really to only be important in women. It causes uterine contraction and milk letdown. But they have found that oxytocin increases when anybody does actions that reinforce bonding. So even men, when they're bottle feeding their baby, will release oxytocin. Lately, or more recently, they found out that oxytocin is released during sex, so they've been calling it the love hormone, hence the little cartoon here in the picture. Antidiuretic hormone is sometimes abbreviated ADH. It too comes out of the posterior pituitary like oxytocin. It goes to your kidneys and tells them to save water. So ADH is released when you're dehydrated, so you don't make as much urine, hopefully keeping any body water you still have in you. So ADH, antidiuretic. A diuretic is something that makes you pee, so antidiuretic makes you not pee. Thyroid hormone, sometimes abbreviated T3 or T4, that abbreviation comes from the number of iodine molecules. Thyroid hormone is the only compound in the human body that has iodine in it. And people were so short of that and so lacking in iodine that they added iodine to salt, iodized salt. And it fixed most of people's thyroid problems. But now we've kind of gone back to sea salt, so I don't know if that'll show back up again. Thyroid hormone comes out of the thyroid gland, very creative there. Pretty much thyroid hormone targets nearly all the cells in the body because it helps regulate metabolism. If you don't have thyroid hormone, your metabolism slows down and you can think slow, fat, and cold. Thyroid hormone without that causes weight gain. It makes everything slower, even thinking. And without a lot of metabolism, you don't generate as much body heat. On the other hand, you can imagine too much thyroid hormone tends to make people hyper, unable to sleep, and increase heat production, so you're not cold, that type of thing. This is a lipid-soluble hormone, so you can take it by pill because it will be absorbed rather than digested like a protein. So people who are hypothyroid can easily be treated by just giving them the pill. Aldosterone comes out of the adrenal gland, and it works through some other hormones as this little picture indicates, but you should remember that it goes to the kidney and tells it to save sodium. Aldosterone saves sodium. And when you save salt, because of the rules of osmosis, you save water. So it can cause water retention indirectly because it's saving sodium. Aldosterone is also a steroid hormone. Norepinephrine, or epinephrine, and there's only one hydrogen difference, so they can kind of be used interchangeably. Remember, norepinephrine, we've talked about before, it's also a neurotransmitter. It is released from the adrenal gland when you're stressed and has many, many targets. Remember the sympathetic nervous system? It works through this hormone, and it tells your heart to speed up, your breathing rate to speed up. It increases the release of glucose from your liver, dilates your pupils, increases your alertness. It slows down digestion, slows down urine formation. It's the fight or flight hormone. Okay? We can mimic this a little bit with caffeine. Okay? Adrenaline is another name for epinephrine, and caffeine mimics that a little bit. Cortisol is another hormone that comes out of the adrenal gland. So we have three from the adrenal gland: epinephrine, cortisol, and aldosterone. Cortisol targets liver fat and muscle, and it tells those tissues to release energy into the blood. So that tells the liver to release glucose, the muscles to release amino acids, the fat tissue to release fatty acids. It's giving you this extra energy to deal with stress. It's more of a long-term stress hormone, but long-term, you can imagine all these extra energy molecules in the blood. If you don't burn them up, they're stored as fat. So initially, cortisol might help you lose some weight or have this extra energy around, but in the long term, it tends to cause weight gain. So long-term stress generally isn't good. It also can suppress the immune system. We mimic this by taking prednisone. Doctors will sometimes prescribe that if you have swelling or an allergic reaction or pain in a joint. They'll give you cortisol shots there to try to reduce the pain and swelling. Insulin and the next hormone, glucagon, are both released from the pancreas, and they work in opposite. They have the same targets, liver, fat, and muscle, but insulin lowers blood sugar, so it tells the liver, the muscle, and the fat to take in that energy, bring in the glucose, the fatty acids, the amino acids, and store. Insulin is a storage hormone, so the function is to get those nutrients out of the blood into the tissues. Whereas glucagon does the exact opposite. It tells the liver, fat, and the muscle to release those energy molecules. So after you eat, insulin's going to go up, and before you eat or when you're hungry, glucagon will go up, because the goal is to keep you at homeostatic blood sugar level, which I'm sure you all remember is 60 to 110. So glucagon and insulin work opposite of each other. So hopefully you just remembered what I just said. What is normal fasting blood sugar supposed to be? 60 to 110. Insulin and glucagon are hormones used to balance blood sugar. Insulin increases or decreases blood sugar. Hopefully you said decreases blood sugar by making cells take in the nutrients, whereas glucagon increases blood sugar by making the cells release the nutrients. Okay, so in the morning when you get up, assuming you did not get up in the middle of the night and eat, which hormone should be higher? Glucagon. I found this interesting graph in a research study. They were looking at people's blood sugar levels. So on the y-axis here, they're measuring the dependent variable is blood sugar, and across the bottom is time after you eat. So for the first hour or two of this graph, blood sugar is going down because you have not eaten. Once you eat a meal, blood sugar goes up. And what they're comparing here across the time is if you ate really sugary foods in the red line, if you ate white bread, white rice, or white pasta in the yellow line, and if you ate whole grains, veggies, or beans, stuff like that, in the blue line. Notice your blood sugar spikes much higher if you eat really sugary foods like Mountain Dew and cookies. Okay, but if you had a potato, okay, maybe not so much, and if you had a sweet potato and whole wheat bread and vegetables, it stays within that more healthy. This is why they tell you not to eat really sugary foods, because it spikes your blood sugar so high. And over the long term, keeping your sugar between those green lines is what you want. That's homeostasis. All right, the next two hormones are also opposite of each other. Parathyroid hormone comes out of the parathyroid gland. And this picture shows the back side of the thyroid gland. Okay, these four little gold dots there are the parathyroid glands. They secrete parathyroid hormone, which targets the kidney and the bones. And the function of parathyroid hormone is to increase your blood calcium. So it tells your kidneys to save it, don't pee it out because we need it, and your bones to release some. Okay, so parathyroid hormone has two targets, the bones and the kidneys, and it's telling them to keep the calcium or release the calcium because we need to increase blood levels. Calcitonin does the opposite. The thyroid gland releases calcitonin when blood calcium is too high, and it tells the kidneys and the bones to get rid of it. The kidneys to pee it out and the bones to soak it up. Okay, so again, the targets are the same for calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, but it has the opposite actions. Here's a picture of that. If your blood calcium goes too high, calcitonin is released, tells your kidneys to pee it out and your bones to soak it up. If it's too low, parathyroid hormone is released. It tells your kidneys to save it and your bones to release it, keeping your blood calcium levels at that homeostatic level. The next hormone is melatonin. It comes out of the pineal gland and doesn't go very far. It targets the hypothalamus right in the brain there. And it goes up at night and down during the day. And they think that up and down of melatonin is somehow triggering a clock inside our heads or a timer. It's a way the brain knows how old we are. If you look online for melatonin, you can buy this and take it as a supplement, and it cures absolutely everything. They really haven't got a good handle on what melatonin does or doesn't do. They do know, and it does seem to help a little bit. You sleep when your daylight cycle gets screwed up because of flying across time zones, jet lag, that type of thing. But it's not necessarily recommended that you just take melatonin to fall asleep. They think that it plays a role in migration and seasonal breeding patterns of other animals, but humans don't do that. All right, the next hormones, I'm kind of grouping them together. Estrogen, testosterone, and progesterone released from the ovaries or testes, but only happens at puberty. At puberty, a hormone called GnRH is released from the hypothalamus, and it tells the pituitary gland to release FSH and LH. And these hormones, in men and in women, in this picture it's targeting the ovary, but in men it targets the testes, basically starts puberty happening. The genital organs start to grow, estrogen, progesterone are made by women, and testosterone is produced by men, and all kinds of different things happen to the body, and changes occur, and we'll talk about that in Unit 15. But, and there's lots of targets for estrogen and testosterone. It depends on the sex a little bit, but for example, muscle and bone growth with testosterone and growth hormone is a huge bump compared to estrogen and growth hormone, which is why at the end of puberty boys tend to be bigger than girls. But if you give a woman extra estrogen, it will, in this picture it shows that, it will go up and turn off FSH and LH and GnRH. So that's why estrogen and progesterone too are used as birth control pills. When the levels get high enough, it shuts off the releasing factors. It's another example of negative feedback, kind of like your furnace shuts off when you get temperature, when you reach the temperature you've set your thermostat at. You could use testosterone to turn these off too in men, but that's generally not done because extra testosterone can cause some other harmful effects that you wouldn't want necessarily to happen. Anyway, we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the reproductive chapter as well. Alright, so those hormones that we just went through are the ones that you need to know what they do. So make a list, do a flashcards, whatever you need to do so you have those kind of memorized. You're going to need to know that for the final exam and also for the unit quiz at the end of Unit 9. So the last little bit of this slideshow talks about the ways we control hormone levels. Obviously, too much or too little of a hormone could cause problems. And we have 3 different ways our body does to regulate those hormone levels. In general, it is harder to treat somebody who makes too much hormone. We have to take the gland out. Whereas if you're missing a hormone, sometimes we can give it to you medically. We can give it to you as a pill. So it's better if the body can regulate the levels. One way is negative feedback, and I kind of showed you that just now with estrogen. One way is the brain. The nervous system is in control of a couple of the hormones. And last, a nutrient or a blood component determines how much hormone is released. And the good example of this one is insulin. The more sugar you eat, the more insulin is released. So it's controlled by your diet until you can't anymore. So in negative feedback, a good example is thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is released from the thyroid gland when the pituitary releases thyroid stimulating hormone. That's released from the pituitary gland when the hypothalamus releases thyrotropin releasing hormone. And while I only told you about thyroid hormone, there are two other hormones used in this control system. And basically what happens is when thyroid hormone levels are adequate or high enough, it feeds back and shuts off the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus from releasing the releasing factors. So you have less TRH and TSH released when thyroid levels are high. And that when thyroid levels go down again, the inhibition stops and these release, and you release more thyroid hormone. So it basically keeps your thyroid hormone levels fairly constant over days, weeks, months. We don't have a cycling of thyroid hormone, or we shouldn't. It should stay fairly constant. You have several examples of this hypothalamic pituitary gland pathway. Thyroid hormone works like this, cortisol works like this, prolactin works like this, growth hormone, LH, FSH, estrogen, and testosterone work like this, and there's one more that work through this similar pathway. The next way to control hormone levels is via the nervous system. Sensory information that the brain receives controls the release, for example, of epinephrine. If you see a deer run in front of you while you're driving down the road, your fight or flight system is activated because your brain perceives that as dangerous. So the brain really controls the release of epinephrine. ADH is another hormone that is controlled by the brain sensing whether you're dehydrated or not. When a baby cries or starts to nurse, that physical stimulation of the nipple or hearing the baby cry will cause the release of oxytocin, which then will allow milk to be released. So all of these are examples of the brain using sensory information to control the release of a hormone. Last, you have homeostatic control. This is the insulin example. Blood glucose levels really determine how much insulin or glucagon is released. Blood calcium levels really determine whether you release parathyroid or calcitonin. There is another example, and that would be aldosterone. Remember, aldosterone saves sodium, so if your sodium levels are low, aldosterone is going to be released because you need to save sodium because you need to get those back up to normal. Okay. Here's a picture of calcium regulation, for example. I showed you one previously, but when blood calcium goes up, you release calcitonin or parathyroid hormone depending on whether the calcium levels get too high or too low, and that helps balance the calcium. Parathyroid hormone would make you save calcium. Calcitonin is going to make you release or pee out or soak up the calcium to get blood levels back down. So why do we care? Why is it important that hormone levels stay fairly normal? Well, look what happens when it doesn't. Can you guess which hormone is a problem here? In dwarfism, gigantism, and or acromegalia? Growth hormone is the problem. Obviously too much here, or it acts too much and not enough in dwarfism. So how do you check someone's hormone levels? Always, always, always hormones should be found in the blood. So take blood and measure it from there. Do you think it is easier to treat someone who has low or high hormone levels? Hopefully you remember it's easier to treat when it's low because you can give them the hormone. If it's a protein hormone, the hormone has to be injected because your body thinks it's a protein and will chew it up like any other protein. Whereas steroid or lipid hormones like estrogen, progesterone, or cortisol can be absorbed through the cell membranes before digestion. So you can take it by pill, a cream, a patch. It goes right through the cell membranes. So the hormones that are easier to give to people are usually the steroid hormones because you can give them by pill. It's a little harder. They are trying to work on an insulin or a form of insulin that can be taken by pill because people don't like to do that whole injection thing. Okay, so that is the end of Unit 9. Don't forget to do the reading assignment, check out the Quizlets, and there's lots of good animations in this. Go to the original PowerPoint and watch those if these things were unclear. And don't forget, you can always email me.